Warhammer 40k is a massive universe, and it's been around for a long time. Since the 80s, Warhammer 40k has evolved from vague, open-ended stories that add a little bit of background for army building to an overarching and continuous narrative that spans video games, Black Library novels, and a plethora of other media in between. But with the expansion of any universe to such a degree comes change. Some better, some worse. Yet, the Warhammer community seems extremely opposed to any change, perceived or otherwise. Why is that? We're going to do a little bit of speculation and see if we can't get to the bottom of it, or at the very least, say something that'll make for a good title and a thumbnail. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Starhammer. There's a lot of controversy that's plagued Warhammer 40k during its time in our corporeal realm, but in this video, I'm going to focus on two of the more recent ones that have stirred the pot the most, in my opinion. Custodians and the introduction of Primaris Space Marines. Now, Primaris Rage videos are a bit harder to come by these days as it's ancient history at this point, but for the Custodians, you'll often find videos like these. What is the point of all this rage? Why the outrage over little plastic dudes? It's more to start with that some of this hate and fear, and yeah, there's fear involved, is justified. I made a video about a year ago talking about Custodians, and another shortly after talking about how gatekeeping is bad. While I stand by everything I said in those videos, I do think it's worth clarifying a little bit about gatekeeping. I do think that, in a general sense, gatekeeping is bad and largely unnecessary. Everyone should get the chance to become part of this community, play the game, whatever, if they want to. That said, we nerds have been a historically marginalized group. Often we take solace in our hobbies and interests as a refuge from whatever we have going on in our lives. That's not exclusive to nerds, of course, but that's a feeling that everyone in this community can relate to. Nothing quite like going home after a long day and painting some models while you listen to lore, or reading a new Black Library novel while you're sipping on a soda pop. Because of that, these things become part of our personal identities. They define who we are to others. Kind of like how pheromone maxing in a game shop defines you as a walking stereotype. But it's natural to want to protect this. Communities in general, at least in my experience, do a pretty good job of regulating themselves and their special interests in a way that doesn't exclude. You can look at Battlefield 6 right now and see how the community gatekept some of the COD shit from the game, like making matches shorter and brightly colored skins. EA walked back many of the changes and toned down the neon and all the player skins thanks to widespread community pushback, and still didn't exclude COD players from coming in and trying things out. But the issues plaguing Battlefield were issues that actually affected the state of the game, not just its identity. For our chosen Warhammer issues, only one of them really had any noticeable impact on things, and that's the introduction of the Primaris Space Marines. During one of their attempts to move the story forward in a big way, Games Workshop had painted the Imperium as an entity backed into a corner, beset on all sides by aliens and heretics, outnumbered and outgunned with the walls closing in. In the most desperate moment, Primarch of the Ultramarines, Bruce Gilliman, Lord Commander of the Imperium, unveiled his secret weapon, a new generation of Space Marines to be deployed across the galaxy to push back the tide. The brainchild of Gilliman and Belisarius Cawl and Archimagos of the Mechanicum, and a new character at the time, the Primaris Marines were faster, stronger, and just generally better over the Emperor's original design. Though this faced a bit of pushback in the lore from the wider Imperium, particularly the Mechanicus and certain Space Marine chapters, the Primaris Marines eventually came to make up the majority of the Astartes forces. GW retcon established lore dating back 10,000s of years in time, but in reality this was a decision by GW to refresh their model ring, phase out overlapping units, and make the brand appeal to new players in a more modern setting. Space Marine models started to look pretty dated, with many kits in circulation left over from the early 2000s or even the 90s. Warhammer not only needed to progress its timeline to keep things interesting and pave the way for new stories, but they also needed to freshen up the brand. What better way to do that than a facelift to your poster faction? Now, the lore explanation for Primaris Marines didn't mean much to new players, obviously, but for some veteran players, this would prove to be a sore point. Players had spent years crafting identities for their custom chapters and characters, with GW now changing things up and making it seem like your OCs were suddenly weaker and not nearly as special as you perceived them to be, thanks to the new lore update. On top of that, kits were pulled from the GW site and stores to make way for the new models, which were of slightly different scale than the current ones and a little bit more limited in what they could do. Whereas Firstborn Marines are kind of like jacks of all trades, Primaris Marines were a bit more specialized, with squads like Hellblasters having a unique battlefield role they fulfilled. This meant that a lot of units these players already had wouldn't work in the new edition. And sure, you could always say, this is X squad, I'm running it as Y squad, but players felt a bit attacked and betrayed by the decision GW had made. Until a point, that's justified. You spend years building a Space Marine army, and then suddenly GW wipes out half your list, in the new edition with new models that might not fit the aesthetic or playstyle you prefer. To the other point, things cannot remain stagnant, especially something like Warhammer. Art changes, society changes, therefore Warhammer must also change in one way or another. We went from a blocky, almost cartoonish art style to a sleek and realistic tone. At the end of the day, people may not have been able to run all the same units and such, but you can still run your firstborn models in most places, and nobody's going to bat an eye. But speaking of societal change, this is where we're going to talk about the dreaded femstodies. When female custodians were announced, GW infamously clarified on Twitter that there had always been female custodians. This, of course, led to a lot of our more clickbait-inclined content creators and chronically online Twitter retards to foam at the mouth over women being in a role that had been previously described as a brotherhood. What was next? The Brothers of Silence? Female Space Marines? GW had been infected by the woke mind virus, and they're pushing their ideology onto our game. GW hates the fans and the lore. While I still believe the level of shit this stirred up was totally unjustified, stirring up any shit at all was not. GW did just sort of drop this out of nowhere like they did with the Primaris Marines. The big difference is GW actually put the effort in to explain the change with Primaris, whereas with femstodies, they just tried to gaslight everyone into thinking they've already been part of the setting. On that count, I totally agree that what GW did here was a bad move. I mean, how hard was it to just say that there's always been the option to have femstodies? They just haven't been a thing in the recent history of the Imperium. Brotherhood can also be used as a generic term to describe an organization. Case in point, the Dark Brotherhood from the Elder Scrolls series, which has women as members. So why not just write up a quick little thing like that, and instead of just saying they were always here? Now, was this some big marketing push by GW to get more chicks to play the game, or more blue-haired Tumblr lefties into invade game shops? No, not really. I once maintained that GW would use this as an excuse to justify selling a pack of female custodian heads for way too much, but it seems they can't even be bothered to do the bare minimum with selling the concept either. Yet here we are, over a year later, and the femstodies controversy never amounted to anything. Much like myself and everyone else who wasn't trying to make themselves the victim said it would happen. Games Workshop didn't walk it back and hasn't really done anything with it besides introducing a couple characters. Partly because it literally changes barely anything about the established lore, but also because GW just doesn't give a fuck what you think. And they don't give a fuck what I think either. They're not our friend. They're not your local ma and pa game shop. They are an international corporation, and they're going to do whatever they think they got to do to make more money. GW isn't infected by the woke mind virus. They don't hate the players or the lore by pushing out Primaris models or femstodies. They're doing whatever they think is going to make them more money. And if that's being mildly more inclusive or making the art style more modern, then they're going to do it. They must be doing something right, because they're operating at a massive surplus according to their earnings report. But let's circle back to the anger and fear. Why do Warhammer fans feel that way when seemingly every announcement like these is enough to grab the pitchforks and torches and go burn down the castle? It's because people have fallen into the trap of taking a game about little toy soldiers way too seriously. A lot of Warhammer info, tea, etc. comes from content creators like myself. And a lot of these content creators, like myself, enjoy making money from their videos, so they're incentivized to make these crazy claims about the woke agenda pervading Warhammer and all that sort of shit. When a change happens, big or small, you get shit like, GW is disrespecting the fans, or GW just killed Warhammer. And while these do make for some pretty clickable titles and flavor, and people like this do nothing but harm the community. And serious people that do this shit do nothing but harm the community. I've been disappointed by plenty of GW decisions before. I'm still coping and seething about the Thousand Suns nerf, but at the end of the day, I don't have to think about it unless I'm playing my Thousand Suns. Feeling anger at GW or hate for doing their bullshit justification for femstodies or something like that is something I can't even imagine. And I think this goes back to identity politics. When more conservative-minded fans, as in don't want change, not politically conservative, perceive any change as a personal attack because, you know, they're an Eldar player or whatever. And GW changing Wraithbone lore is a direct attack on a key aspect of their life and disrespectful to Eldar players. This is something they based part of themselves on. And any attempt by GW to change a piece of that is the company trying to force you to change your worldview to accept the new lore or whatever else. Players are afraid they'll have to change if their faction or their game changes. They're afraid they'll no longer be able to relate to the hobby or the community building up around said changes. And to a degree, I get it. We all want to feel like we belong, and change can be scary. But one thing Warhammer players seem to forget is that despite it all, your favorite faction is nothing more than a product. You might really vibe with any given faction, but at the end of the day, the lore and stories are meant as a mechanic to sell you models. GW says so themselves. They're all about selling the best miniatures in the world. They are a model company first and foremost. Everything else is a marketing tool. That's not to say you can't make Warhammer part of who you are. I sure have. I mean, I make fucking YouTube videos about it and try to get more people into it as often as I can, but I do it because I want to share what makes me happy with others, not because I'm trying to evangelize our fictional imperium and create more space racists. Warhammer has to change. Warhammer will change. But it's important to remember that you don't necessarily have to change with it. You can still be who you are and like it and enjoy it, even if you are a little fringe one way or another. And while it is a lot of fun to dunk on chuds or lefties, and sometimes important to call these folks out, the people who seek to change this hobby for the worst will always filter themselves out. They'll see nobody's taking them seriously, and they'll crawl back under whatever Reddit rock they emerged from. Warhammer fans seem to take the in-universe mantra of forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future there is only war, a bit too seriously. And it's what leads to nuclear meltdowns and attacks of identity politics when even tiny things get changed. It's fine to identify with Warhammer, it's not fine to make it so entrenched in your life that you want to burn a building down because women can guard the Emperor. Most fans aren't like this, obviously. Most people are smart enough to avoid the Ragebait slop content and continue on about their day, disappointed or otherwise in GW's infinite wisdom. I think that being defensive or cautious of a change is totally fine, but being downright angry and afraid of it is what causes shit to get stirred up when there's no reason to, and it makes our community lesser for it. Warhammer fans love Warhammer. They want to protect it. And that's really cool, but it shouldn't be at the expense of rejecting literally any change. Life changes, society changes, art changes. You don't necessarily have to change with it, but you do have to accept the fact that change happens. I don't think Warhammer fans actually hate change when it comes to the hobby. I think they hate change in the hobby because it makes them feel like they have to change too. And generally, I think this comes from a good place. Skepticism is healthy, but of course, there's always those r/Horus Galaxy lunatics who want to melt down about this sort of stuff and make nerds like me able to make a video about it all. So shout out to you guys. And that's it for this one, folks. Do you think Warhammer fans love to hate change? Do you think Warhammer content creators should be more concerned with the health of the community, or are they right to only care about the clicks? In today's internet landscape, having a polarized opinion is what gets attention, but I think that it's important we remember that nuance is in just about everything, and to take a step back if we get triggered about a change, and think about it if it's really worth our time and effort. I hope I provided a little bit of that nuance take today, but let me know down below. As always, drop a like if you like it, subscribe if you really liked it, and check the community tab for shitposts and shenanigans. I'll see y'all in the next one.